Nanny was fired for hugging boss's son. Then he screamed one word that changed everything. The sun had barely risen when Clarissa Thomas wrapped the scarf around her head and stepped out of her small apartment in the south side of town. The air smelled of damp earth and old magnolia trees. And as she walked to the bus stop, she hummed softly to herself, a tune her mother used to sing before dementia took her memories piece by piece. Clarissa, now in her early 40s, had once stood at the front of a bright, buzzing kindergarten classroom. Her laughter had once echoed alongside the squeals of toddlers mastering colors and letters. But when her mother got sick, she traded lesson plans for medications, chalkboards for adult diapers, and the joy of the classroom for the quiet ache of goodbye. After her mother passed, Clarissa found herself adrift. Teaching jobs were hard to come by again, especially for a black woman with a career gap. So, when the opportunity came to work as a nanny for a wealthy family in the suburbs, she took it, not out of desperation, but with hope that maybe, just maybe, she could still do what she loved: care, nurture, and teach. The Thompsons' home was massive, clean lines, glass walls, white marble floors that whispered money with every polished surface. Mrs. Thompson, elegantly dressed and always busy, met her at the door that first morning with a clipboard and a carefully practiced smile. Mr. Thompson, polite but distant, shook her hand with the stiffness of someone unused to interacting with staff. And then there was Elliot. He stood at the top of the stairs, clutching a small plush giraffe, his pale face blank and unreadable. His hair was tousled, and his socks mismatched. Clarissa smiled up at him gently, instinctively softening her voice. "Hi there, sweet pea. I'm Clarissa, but you can call me Rissa, if you like." He didn't reply. He turned and walked away. Mrs. Thompson sighed. "Don't take it personally. He doesn't talk to anyone. Not since." She paused, as if weighing how much to say. "Not since the accident." Later that day, Clarissa learned the rest from the housekeeper. Elliot's older sister, Hannah, had died in a car crash a year ago. Elliot had been in the car too, though unharmed, but since then, he'd stopped speaking in full sentences. He avoided touch, flinched at sudden sounds, and rarely smiled. Several therapists had come and gone. So had 3 previous nannies. "He needs structure," Mrs. Thompson had said firmly, "and someone who won't coddle him, but obviously gentle." Clarissa had smiled without comment. She knew better than to explain that healing didn't happen with rules. And sometimes the kindest thing was exactly what the world called coddling. The days passed slowly at first. Elliot wouldn't let Clarissa near him. If she sat on the couch, he sat on the floor. If she offered a toy, he ignored it. Meals were quiet affairs with more untouched plates than conversation. But Clarissa wasn't discouraged. She had learned patience from teaching, and deeper patience from caring for her mother. She showed up each day with the same calm, same warm smile, same gentle offers: a puzzle, a storybook, a soft tune sung under her breath while folding laundry. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted. Elliot had been sitting by the window, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. Clarissa sat on the floor, humming and flipping through a picture book. Suddenly, he spoke. "That one," he whispered, pointing. She looked up, surprised. "This one? The elephant?" He nodded. It was the first time he'd responded to her directly. Clarissa didn't make a big fuss. She just smiled and began reading, her voice low and even. Halfway through, she noticed he had crept closer. By the end of the story, he was sitting beside her, legs crossed like hers, eyes wide. From that day on, the walls began to crumble. He began to follow her into the kitchen, help her pick out apples, watch her fold napkins into silly shapes. He still didn't talk much, but the silence no longer felt cold. When she sang, he'd tap his foot. When she hummed a lullaby, he'd press his giraffe toy to his chest and hum along. And then, one morning, it happened. Clarissa had just placed his cereal on the table when Elliot looked up. His blue eyes earnest. "Mama Rissa," he said softly, "you forgot the spoon." Clarissa froze. The spoon in her hand nearly dropped. Her heart stuttered in her chest. "What did you call me? Baby?" he repeated, a little louder this time. "Mama Rissa." She blinked rapidly, a lump rising in her throat. No one had called her Mama since her miscarriage all those years ago, a pain she never voiced aloud. And now this fragile little boy, with his wounds and silences, had offered her that name. Freely, without hesitation, she knelt down and hugged him. It was instinct, natural, pure. She held him with the kind of care only someone who has loved and lost can offer. And for the first time, Elliot didn't pull away. He wrapped his thin arms around her and rested his head against her shoulder. In that moment, there were no walls, no roles, no pasts, just two broken hearts fitting together like puzzle pieces. Clarissa didn't see the small red light blinking above the kitchen door, the hidden nanny cam recording everything. Mrs. Thompson saw it later that evening on her tablet. She had been sipping wine, reviewing the day's footage more out of habit than suspicion. But as the screen showed Clarissa kneeling, embracing her son, something in her jaw tightened. Her fingers paused over the rewind button. She watched it again, and again. The look in Elliot's eyes. The word he used. The way he clung to Clarissa like he'd found something he didn't want to lose. Mrs. Thompson set down her glass. She didn't say anything that night. But when Clarissa arrived the next morning, she noticed a difference. The air was stiffer. Mrs. Thompson's greetings were clipped. The usual warmth, or what passed for it, was gone. Clarissa sensed it, but didn't know why. Elliot, meanwhile, bloomed. He talked more, played more, even laughed when Clarissa did her silly puppet voice during bath time. Every time he called her, Mama Rissa, her heart swelled, but somewhere, in the back of her mind, a quiet unease stirred. Love, she knew, was complicated in houses like this, especially when it crossed lines not drawn by affection, but by skin. She tucked Elliot into bed that evening with a song and a kiss on the forehead. He clung to her hand a little longer than usual. Don't leave, he whispered. She smiled. I'm right here, baby. But even as she said it, Clarissa felt the walls closing in. Clarissa sensed the shift before anyone said a word. It was subtle at first, a delayed good morning from Mrs. Thompson. A missed thank you after a well-prepared lunch. A polite smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. Where there had once been a strained civility, now there was cool formality. It wasn't unusual for employers to keep their distance, especially in homes like these, where hired help was expected to be invisible, present, but quiet, essential, but never quite part of the family. But this was different. It was as if Clarissa had crossed a line she hadn't known existed. And now she was being gently but firmly pushed back behind it. She tried to brush it off. Perhaps Mrs. Thompson was just busy. Perhaps it had nothing to do with her. But then, on a Tuesday afternoon, she heard it. Clarissa had gone to return Elliot's sweater to the upstairs closet. The voices of Mr. and Mrs. Thompson drifted down the hall from behind a slightly ajar door. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She was raised better than that. But her name stopped her mid-step. I saw the footage. Mrs. Thompson's voice was crisp, almost brittle. She hugged him again. Mr. Thompson's voice was softer. He looked happy. That's not the point, Greg. He's becoming dependent. He clings to her. It's not healthy. She's filling that space. The one Hannah left behind. But it's too much. Don't you see that? Clarissa's heart dropped. She backed away slowly, quietly, sweater forgotten in her hands. Her chest tightened as the words repeated in her mind. Filling that space. Too much. She had known the risks. She had felt the invisible line. And now, it seemed, she'd crossed it. The next few days felt like walking through fog. Elliot, unaware of the tension, was blossoming like spring after a long winter. He talked to her about everything, dinosaurs, the moon, his dreams, and sometimes even about Hannah, in quiet tones full of memory. He laughed freely now, even at silly things like mashed potatoes shaped like clouds. He insisted Clarissa be the one to tuck him in. He wouldn't eat unless she sat beside him. He asked for her songs at bedtime and reached for her hand without fear. It should have been a joy to witness. But Clarissa saw the shadows gathering. She caught the way Mrs. Thompson watched them when she thought Clarissa wasn't looking, eyes narrowed. Lips pursed. She noticed the subtle exclusion. A birthday invitation for Elliot's cousin's party. Handed directly to the housekeeper with a quiet, "Don't worry about giving this to Clarissa." The way her lunch was left in the back of the fridge now. Like a forgotten item. Still, she stayed, not out of need, but for Elliot, for his shy smile when he saw her each morning, for the way he whispered, "Mama Rissa," like it was a secret that made him feel safe. Then came the night that changed everything. It was just past midnight. The house was quiet, wrapped in shadows. Clarissa lay in the guest quarters, drifting between sleep and wakefulness. When she heard it, a sharp cry. Then sobs. Elliot. She didn't hesitate. Barefoot, she rushed through the hallway. Heart pounding, she found him in bed, tangled in sheets, his face wet with tears. No, Hannah, don't go, don't go. Clarissa sat on the edge of his bed, gathered him gently into her arms. He clung to her, shaking, pressing his face into her neck. I'm here, baby, she whispered, stroking his back. You're safe. It was just a dream. I've got you. His cries softened into hiccups, then quiet breaths. Slowly, he calmed in her arms. I dreamed she was calling me, he mumbled, but I couldn't reach her. She left. Clarissa felt the weight of those words. Heavy with grief, she held him closer, cradled him until his breathing slowed, and he drifted back to sleep. Only then did she ease him down and quietly return to her room, unaware that the camera in the corner of Elliot's ceiling had captured every moment. The next morning, the air was different, heavy, still. Mrs. Thompson didn't greet her at the door. The housekeeper wouldn't meet her eyes. Elliot ran to her as usual, but was quickly pulled away by his mother with a strained, "Go get your shoes, sweetie." Clarissa knew, before a word was said. She knew. Mid-morning, she was called into the study. Mrs. Thompson sat behind the mahogany desk, her expression carefully composed. Mr. Thompson stood by the window, arms crossed. We reviewed last night's footage. Mrs. Thompson began, voice cool. It was concerning. Clarissa blinked. You mean when Elliot had a nightmare? Mrs. Thompson's eyes narrowed. You entered his room. You held him, comforted him in bed. That's not part of your professional duties. I'm sorry, Clarissa said quietly, but he was terrified. I couldn't just let him cry alone. Mr. Thompson shifted, his mouth opening slightly, then closing again. He didn't speak. Mrs. Thompson's voice sharpened. You've grown too familiar, too emotionally involved. It's not appropriate. We hired you as a caregiver, not a parent. Clarissa swallowed. She wanted to protest, to say that love wasn't a crime, that every child deserved warmth, especially one so broken, but the decision was already made. She could see it in their eyes. I think it's best we end your employment, Mrs. Thompson said, effective immediately. Clarissa felt the ground shift beneath her. She nodded slowly, too proud to beg, too heartbroken to fight. Can I say goodbye to Elliot? Mrs. Thompson stood. I don't think that would be helpful. We'll explain it to him, kindly. But the door behind them creaked open. Elliot stood there, his little fists clenched, his eyes wide with confusion and rising panic. No, he said softly. No, 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 don't go. Clarissa knelt, tears already welling in her eyes. Sweetheart. He ran to her, throwing his arms around her neck. Please don't leave me, Mama Rissa. Please, I'll be good, I promise. Don't let them take you. Mrs. Thompson's expression flickered, just for a second between guilt and discomfort. Mr. Thompson looked away. Clarissa held Elliot tightly, her own tears falling freely now. I love you, baby, so much, but I have to go now. Why? What did I do? He sobbed. Nothing. You did nothing wrong. You are the bravest boy I know. She pulled back, gently prying his arms from her neck, then turned and walked out of the house, her back straight, heart shattered. Behind her, Elliot screamed. One word. Mama. It echoed through the halls, piercing and raw. It stopped Clarissa mid-step on the front porch. Inside, Mrs. Thompson flinched. Elliot screamed again, louder. Mama. And something cracked in the silence. Clarissa didn't turn around. She knew better. That house was no longer a place for love like hers. But behind her, in that cold, marble hallway, Elliot stood sobbing in his pajamas. And two very privileged parents were left with a truth they didn't want to face. They had just fired the one person who had taught their son how to feel safe again. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had done something they couldn't explain. She loved him, and he loved her back. But she didn't look like them. And for some people, that was enough. Clarissa didn't look back. As the front door shut behind her, the sound of Elliot's cries echoed in her ears like a haunting lullaby turned to grief. She pressed one hand to her chest, as though it could keep her heart from splintering, the other holding the strap of her modest overnight bag, her entire life reduced to what could be packed in a hurry. The cold morning air bit against her cheeks, mixing with the heat of her tears. She didn't see Mrs. Thompson freeze in the foyer. Didn't see Mr. Thompson's slow turn toward his son, who collapsed to the floor, wailing the same word over and over, "Mama, Mama, Mama." Clarissa didn't see any of it. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, past the perfectly trimmed hedges, past the black iron gate, past the silence of a world that had no room for her kind of love. Days passed. Inside the grand house, time didn't quite move the same. At first, they told Elliot that Clarissa had found another job, that she had gone away, that sometimes nannies leave, and it's nobody's fault, but the boy knew better. He didn't cry, he didn't argue, he just stopped speaking, stopped smiling, stopped eating, except for a few dry crackers here and there, and only if someone else wasn't watching. He curled up in his bed, refusing to come down for breakfast. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling until exhaustion overtook him. His dreams came sharp and fast, and he would wake with a jolt, shaking, then stare blankly into the dark. The house, so full of quiet murmurs and footsteps just days ago, now echoed with silence. Mrs. Thompson tried to coax him. Stories, toys, bribes, nothing. Mr. Thompson sat with him, tried to show him dinosaur videos, offered to take him to the zoo. Nothing. They brought in a child psychologist twice. Dr. Langston was patient and kind, but even he left with a tight mouth and a shake of the head. "He's grieving," the doctor said. "This is trauma. Removing someone he's emotionally attached to without warning, especially after losing his sister. He's experiencing a second abandonment. I strongly recommend you allow contact with the caregiver, even supervised. He needs closure, at the very least." Mrs. Thompson had stiffened at the suggestion. "We hired her. We can replace her." Dr. Langston didn't respond. He only looked at her for a long moment, then gathered his things and left. 3 more days passed. Sunday evening arrived, and with it, guests. The Thompsons were hosting a small dinner, a quiet, catered affair. Just a few business friends and their spouses. Among the guests was Dr. Bernice Waller, a pediatrician and longtime friend of Mr. Thompson. She was also the only black woman in the room. Elliot had been coaxed into wearing a sweater and sitting at the dinner table. Though his eyes were dull, his fork untouched, he didn't speak when spoken to, didn't respond when a guest commented on his curly hair. The adults made polite conversation. Mrs. Thompson tried to appear composed, but her eyes flicked to Elliot every few seconds. Mr. Thompson kept adjusting his collar. There was something about the boy's stillness that made everyone around him nervous, like they were sitting next to a sleeping fuse. Then, without warning, it happened. A plate clattered as Elliot's fork slipped from his hand. He trembled, his face twisted, eyes wide, and then, "Mama." The word tore from his throat with such force that the entire table froze. Elliot stood from his chair so suddenly that it toppled behind him. He pressed both hands to his chest, as if something inside was breaking open. "Mama." Mrs. Thompson reached for him, but he backed away, shouting through sobs, "Bring Mama Rissa back. I want Mama Rissa." His body shook with each cry. "She's the only one who hears me. She's the only one who knows when I'm scared. She's the only one who hugs me right." No one moved. The guests sat in stunned silence. One woman placed her wine glass down very slowly. Someone else whispered, "Dear God." Mrs. Thompson's hand hovered midair. Her eyes filled with something she hadn't let herself feel until now. Guilt. Raw, undeniable guilt. "Sweetheart, please. I want her." Elliot shrieked. "You made her go away. You made her go." He sank to the floor in a heap, crying harder than he had since the day of the accident. His body folded in on itself like a child trying to disappear. At the end of the table, Dr. Bernice Waller stood slowly. She walked to Elliot, knelt beside him, and placed a hand gently on his back. He didn't pull away, but he didn't look at her either. "He's not having a tantrum," she said softly, but her voice carried. "He's grieving." Again, Mrs. Thompson blinked fast. We thought it was best. It was becoming too emotional." Dr. Waller glanced up, and in her gaze was the sharpness of lived experience. "So you removed the one person who loved him in a way that helped him heal?" "She overstepped," Mr. Thompson added, though even he didn't sound convinced. Dr. Waller looked down at the child who was now quietly sobbing. curled up like a question mark on the cold tile. Or maybe, she filled a space none of you could. Maybe that scared you more than you want to admit. No one spoke. She stroked Elliot's back gently. Children don't care about skin color. They care about who listens, who sees them, who makes them feel safe. Mrs. Thompson wiped a tear from her cheek. He called her Mama. Dr. Waller gave her a long, thoughtful look. Yes, and he meant it. Silence descended again, this time heavier, but not as hostile. The walls themselves seemed to absorb the weight of the truth spoken aloud. Clarissa hadn't been just a nanny. She had been a balm to a wound the Thompsons didn't know how to heal. She had given more than a service, she had given presence. Compassion. And Elliot, in the innocence children are often born with and adults often lose, had seen that love for what it was. Real, unfiltered, undeniable. One word had shattered everything, Mama. Not because it was wrong, but because it was right. And that terrified them. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the dishes were cleared, Mrs. Thompson sat at the edge of Elliot's bed. He was asleep now, clutching a small stuffed dog Clarissa had given him. His face was puffy from crying, but calm. She watched him, remembering how he'd used to stare blankly at the ceiling before Clarissa came into their lives. How he had started laughing again, really laughing. How he had spoken about the stars, about dreams. And now, how silent he had become again. Mrs. Thompson leaned down and kissed his forehead, then whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "I'm sorry." She stood and walked to the door. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure what to do next. But she knew one thing. Clarissa had not broken their son. She had helped put him back together. And they had thrown her away for it. Maybe it was time to face what that really meant. Rain fell lightly on the windshield as Mr. Thompson sat parked on the side of a quiet street lined with modest houses. The wipers moved in a slow, rhythmic sweep, the only sound in a car heavy with silence. He stared at the small white house in front of him. Clarissa's home. He had gotten the address from a file the agency had on record. The same agency that had once praised her as warm, exceptionally skilled with children, and deeply intuitive. The words echoed now in his mind, sounding like a verdict. His hand hovered over the door handle for a long time before he finally stepped out into the rain. Clarissa opened the door without surprise. Her expression was calm, not cold, but far from welcoming. She didn't step aside. He removed his cap, awkward with the weight of what he was about to say. "Clarissa, I just wanted to talk. If that's all right." A long pause. She glanced past him toward the street, then looked back into his eyes. 5 minutes. She led him to a small sitting room filled with photos and soft cushions. A blanket was folded over the arm of the couch. There were children's drawings on the wall, not Elliot's. Probably from the daycare center where she now volunteered part-time. He sat down, unsure what to do with his hands. "I came to apologize," he said, voice low, "for what happened, for how we handled it. It wasn't right." Clarissa folded her hands in her lap. "You fired me for comforting a child who was crying in the dark." "I know," he said quietly. "Do you?" He flinched. We were scared. Things were moving too fast. He was calling you, Mama," she finished for him. "Yes, and I didn't tell him to. I didn't ask him to love me like that. I just showed up for him every day. That's all I did. I realize now how much that meant to him." Mr. Thompson said, "He hasn't been the same." "Neither have I," Clarissa replied. She looked out the window, eyes distant. "You know, this wasn't the first time." He tilted his head. "The first time?" She nodded slowly. "I used to teach kindergarten. Years ago. A good school. Good kids. I loved it." She paused, then continued, her voice tighter. "One day, a white parent complained, said she didn't like how her daughter kept calling me her beloved teacher. Said it made her uncomfortable, like I was getting too close." Mr. Thompson said nothing. "They didn't say it was because I was black," she said. "They never do. But they asked me to step back. To tone it down. To be less. Whatever it was they thought I was being. And when I didn't, they found an excuse to let me go." She looked at him now, her eyes steady. "So when your wife told me I was being overly affectionate, it wasn't a surprise. Just another wound dressed up as professionalism." "I didn't know," he murmured. "You didn't want to know." Clarissa corrected gently, not cruelly. "You saw your son heal in my care. But the moment he showed too much love for someone who didn't look like you." That love became a threat. He looked down. The silence between them was heavy. But not bitter. "I came here today hoping you might come back," he admitted, "but I see now. That's not fair to ask." Clarissa stood. "You were right about one thing." He looked up. "I can't come back, not because I don't love Elliot, but because I won't put myself in a place where love is treated like a liability." Her voice trembled, but her stance never did. Mr. Thompson stood too, suddenly feeling much smaller than he had expected. If there's anything I can do." She shook her head. "There isn't. Just be better. That's all I ever wanted." He left without another word. That night, Mrs. Thompson sat at her desk, reading the letter she had written over and over again. The apology was detailed, heartfelt. She had rewritten it 3 times. Finally, she sent it. The reply came the next day. It wasn't long, just one sentence. "I've always seen your son as a part of my heart." Mrs. Thompson cried alone in her room. The letter pressed to her chest. In the days that followed, Elliot continued to draw pictures. Every single one had Clarissa in it. Sometimes she was flying in the sky with angel wings. Other times, she was holding his hand at a park or sitting beside him while he read. In every drawing, she was smiling. In every drawing, she was real. He wrote, "Mama Rissa," on the top of each one. They pinned them on the fridge, on the hallway wall, on the side of his bed. Not because they believed it made up for what happened, but because they wanted him to remember what love looked like, before they taught him to question it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mr. Thompson sat in his study, looking through the camera archives on their home system. He found the footage of the night Clarissa had gone to comfort Elliot during his nightmare. He watched the way she held him, the way she didn't speak, just rocked him gently, humming softly, like a mother would. He watched how the boy clung to her as if letting go would shatter him. He watched her wipe his tears. Then he closed the laptop and cried for a long time. Clarissa didn't disappear from their lives entirely. Every now and then, Elliot would write a card. Clarissa always wrote back, simple words, drawings, stickers, nothing dramatic, just warmth. The Thompsons never asked her to return again. They knew better now. They had asked for love. And when love came, wrapped in brown skin and a gentle voice, they turned it away because it didn't match the image they were raised to trust. But love doesn't follow rules like that. Love shows up where it's needed. Sometimes, it knocks on your door in the form of a woman named Clarissa, who gives your broken child a reason to laugh again. And if you're lucky, if you're brave enough, you learn not to let it go. The Thompson household was unusually quiet for a birthday. There were balloons. Yes, a small chocolate cake with Elliot's name written in blue icing. A few carefully wrapped presents from neighbors and relatives. But the air was missing something no decoration could replace. Elliot sat at the table, hands folded, staring at the flickering candles on the cake. His parents stood nearby, trying to smile, but their eyes kept drifting toward the boy's solemn face. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Mrs. Thompson encouraged gently. "Make a wish." Elliot looked up, his gaze steady, voice clear and unwavering. "I wish for Mama Rissa to come back." The words settled over the room like a snowfall. No one spoke, no one moved. Then Mrs. Thompson's hand flew to her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. Mr. Thompson let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. They had tried everything, new toys, therapy sessions, trips to the zoo, but nothing had filled the space Clarissa left behind. Nothing reached Elliot the way she did. Nothing brought back the light in his eyes. The candles burned lower, flickering gently in the silence. Then Elliot leaned forward and blew them out in one slow breath. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and Elliot was tucked into bed, the Thompsons sat together on the couch. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Mrs. Thompson finally broke the silence. "He doesn't want more toys, or more playdates, or more help." "I know," Mr. Thompson replied. "He just wants her." He nodded. "She was never just the nanny," she whispered. "She was never less than family," he said. They looked at each other. And in that shared look was something new, humility. Yes, but also clarity. Blank. Blank. 2 days later, Clarissa stood at the same doorstep she had once left with tears in her eyes. The door opened slowly. Mrs. Thompson was the one to answer. Her eyes were red, but she smiled. "Clarissa," she said softly, "please come in." Clarissa stepped inside, The scent of cinnamon and sugar hung faintly in the air. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the soft hum of a lullaby playing from Elliot's room. Mr. Thompson appeared from the hallway. He offered a hesitant but sincere smile. "We wanted to ask. Not for you to be our nanny again." Clarissa tilted her head slightly. "Waiting." Mrs. Thompson took a breath. "But to come back as family. However that looks. However you want it. As someone we respect. Someone we trust. Someone he needs." Clarissa blinked. The words were unexpected. Not rehearsed. Not perfect. But real. Before she could speak, there was the sound of running feet. Then Elliot appeared around the corner. Still in his pajamas. Hair tousled. Eyes wide. "Mama Rissa." He launched forward before anyone could stop him, wrapping his small arms around her waist. Clarissa knelt down to his level and hugged him tight, pressing her cheek against his soft curls. "I missed you so much," he whispered. "I missed you too, baby," she replied, her voice catching. They stayed like that for a long time, his arms locked around her, as if he were anchoring himself to the only thing that still made sense in his world. Then Elliot pulled back slightly and said, with the certainty only children seem to possess, "Home is here now." Clarissa's eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Thompson approached quietly and knelt beside them. She touched Clarissa's arm gently. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling, "for loving him when we didn't know how to. For seeing him. For saving him." Clarissa looked at her, saw not the guarded, polished woman from weeks ago, but a mother, flawed, humbled, learning. "For loving him," Mrs. Thompson repeated, without asking for anything in return. "I didn't need anything in return," Clarissa said, "just to know he was okay." "Well," Mr. Thompson said, clearing his throat, "we were hoping you'd come for dinner. Maybe every week, or every day, or however often you'd like." Clarissa laughed softly. "I think I'd like that." They moved to the living room, where Elliot proudly showed her all the drawings he'd made, dozens of them, each with her name scrawled in crayon. He pointed to one in particular, where she stood holding his hand beneath a rainbow. "This one's my favorite," he said. "It's called Forever Mama." Clarissa didn't speak, she just hugged him again. Mrs. Thompson brought out a small gift box. "It's not much," she said, handing it over, "but we thought it was time." Inside was a necklace, a simple gold charm engraved with one word, family. Clarissa held it between her fingers for a long time, then put it around her neck. Blank. Blank. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons shifted. The house felt different now, warmer, fuller, not because of what was inside it, but because of what had been let in. Not just Clarissa's presence, but the lessons she brought. That love cannot be boxed into roles or job descriptions. That it does not check for skin color before it reaches out. That children, in their simplicity, often understand things adults spend lifetimes unlearning. One afternoon, Elliot's preschool teacher pulled the Thompsons aside. "Your son told another student something today," she said, smiling. "It was beautiful." "What did he say?" Mrs. Thompson asked. The teacher chuckled softly. The other child said, "My mommy looks different than me." And Elliot said, "That's okay. Love doesn't come in just one color." Mr. and Mrs. Thompson exchanged a glance. And that night, as they watched Clarissa read Elliot his bedtime story, they realized something simple and profound. Prejudice is taught, but so is love, and in one small child's voice. In the way he held Clarissa's hand as he drifted off to sleep. They heard something stronger than all the walls they had unknowingly built. They heard healing. They heard truth. They heard hope. They heard the word that had once shattered their silence, now building a bridge back to grace. Mama. And this time, no one flinched. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Sometimes, the smallest voices teach us the biggest lessons. See you in the next story.